this one is the project that was funded by Hawaii Coral Reef Initiative and DAR, and I'd like to thank both agencies for assisting in this project. We're going to be switching gears here a little bit from what was presented this morning and moving more into the social science realm. And I'm going to be presenting some preliminary results from the study we've been doing here on Oahu that a number of you already know a little bit about. A little bit of background: in Hawaii has 7 million annual visitors, people visiting the islands, which represents a 66% growth in the last 20 years. And a big chunk of those folks are participating in some form of marine recreation, and also a big chunk of residents as well. And reefs generate over $360 million of revenue annually. The challenge with this is to manage use so it doesn't get out of control. A lot of people say that our reefs and our beaches and areas are being loved to death. But trying to manage this use and minimize impacts. And when we talk about impacts, there's impacts from a number of different perspectives. Resource impacts, a lot of what we've been talking about this morning, coral trampling, water quality, etc. There's also managerial impacts, pressure on facilities and services at some of these sites, especially the nearshore and onshore sites. And I'll talk a fair amount of attention on the managerial, and also social impacts, crowding at areas. All it takes is just going down to Waikiki Beach and crowding comes to mind. Conflict between different user groups. Those are things that we focused on in this study. And what's important is to get public evaluation of different conditions and also their support for different management options and strategies. Because without public input, without stakeholder input, management actions can be very ineffective without their support. In fact, it's in areas like Yosemite and Yellowstone National Park, it's resulted in lawsuits and court cases. So the main objectives of this study is to use a social science approach as opposed to a physical science approach to examine a number of issues. One issue that we looked at was conflict, whether that exists among and between different user groups at the sites on Oahu, and I'll talk about the sites in a minute. A big one is to look at this issue of carrying capacity, particularly from the social and facility point of view, not the biophysical point, and trying to measure some key capacity indicators. So an indicator, a social indicator might be use level or crowding. Facility indicators might be litter, condition of restrooms, that kind of stuff. And standards when these indicators reach unacceptable levels or thresholds. So an indicator might be use level or crowding, and a standard might be no more than 50% of the people can feel crowded at a given moment in time. Looking and comparing that information with current conditions to see if these standards are being exceeded already at sites, and if they are, that's problematic, and whether people's experiences are being compromised. People's satisfaction with current conditions and the importance of these current conditions. And then a big one is to look at support and opposition to management strategies for dealing with reef impacts, dealing with nearshore beach impacts, how people feel their support and opposition to these things. And in most studies, surveys are conducted where it's just straight up, do you support or oppose education or zoning, those kind of things. The problem is it really comes down to the question is, well, it depends. If the reef is trashed and there's tons of people and the place looks like a bomb's gone off, maybe more restrictive actions like limiting use might be more acceptable versus if things are in pretty good shape, maybe restrictive actions are not necessarily needed. So we'll look at how these different situational factors influence people's evaluations. We did this study at 3 sites, Pupukea Marine Life Conservation District, Waikiki Diamond Head Fisheries Management Area, and Kailua Beach Park were the 3 study sites. And very quickly after visiting these sites, we realized there's some very interesting things within each of these sites. Pupukea, for example, there's 3 major bays, Waimea Bay, there's 3 tables in Sharks Cove. So we actually broke down and did each of those areas separately as well. Waikiki Diamond Head, there's sort of 2 major areas, the Sanssouci Kaimana area right near the natatorium, and then Diamond Head Beach Park down toward where a lot of the surfing goes on. So we broke that site into 2 sites. Kailua Beach Park is one long beach, so we kept that as one single site. So really when we talk about the results, which I'm going to talk about next, we're almost talking about 6 sites, 3 at Pupukea, 2 at Waikiki Diamond Head, and 1 at Kailua. The methods for the study is we conducted on-site surveys, questionnaires with recreationalist users from a number of different groups last summer. That's an important point to make because some of the demographic stuff that I'm going to show at the beginning, remember that it is for summer use, not winter use, and especially at Pupukea, use levels and types of use change in the winter, move more to surfing. Sample size was big, close to 3,000 surveys were administered. That's big for a social science study. We didn't really need that many. All we really needed was 383 to generalize to a population of 1 million people, but we cracked it up with a sledgehammer. The response rate was very good, 87%. A little low at some sites were a little lower than others. That's the average across the different sites. Diamond Head Beach Park was around 70-something%. A lot of surfers that want to get in and out of the water pretty quickly and don't want to talk to you, but it's still 70+%. This sample size allows us to generalize to the population well within the acceptable limits for social science data, the plus or minus 3% at 95% confidence level. These are just the sample sizes from the different sites. So I'm gonna give some very brief descriptive stuff about sort of who's doing what where at these different sites, and go through this relatively quickly and move into some of the more interesting stuff like conflict and crowding and management stuff. Kailua Beach Park, we found that most of the people there were repeat visitors. They've been there before, and a large chunk were female, and the largest proportion, actually at all the sites, were from Hawaii, residents of Hawaii. Very few tourists, actually, at Kailua Beach Park. Most of these people are sunbathing, swimmers, beach walkers, some boating and kayaking going on there. There's a lot of others. I'm just putting up the sort of key three. There's other activities that are going on there, like kite surfing and windsurfing and that, but those were all less than 7%. So I'm just picking out the highlights here. Sans Souci Kaimana, large repeat visitation and a large percent living in Hawaii. Again, similar kind of activity. Sunbathing and swimming is the dominant one. Some beach walking, snorkeling, and surfing. This was a year where the data was collected last year. This area was closed to fishing. It's open now. Fishing would go up if I was to go out and do surveys right now there. Diamond Head Beach Park, large repeat visitation, large percent from Hawaii, and dominated by males. This is the one site that's dominated by males. A lot of them surfing. The two big dominant user groups are surfers and sunbathers and swimmers down there, although there are a fair number of windsurfers there as well, but they were less than 10%. Moving on to Pupukea, I'm going to zip through these relatively quickly. The results are quite similar for each of these sites. 71% repeat visitation at Waimea Bay. That kind of surprised me. I thought most of these would be first-timers and tourists. They're not as much. Similar kind of demographics. We have some snorkeling and beach walking going on there in the summer. In the winter, surfing would be much higher. Three tables, similar kind of demographics. Snorkeling and sunbathing are the two biggies there. A little bit of diving, and then Sharks Cove, snorkeling, diving, and sunbathing. Those are the dominant ones, especially snorkeling at Sharks Cove. So let's move into some more interesting analysis beyond demographics and start talking about recreation conflict. This is an area I've done a lot of research on the last 10 years or so, and the way we measured it was three different indicators in the survey: people being rude or discourteous, being too close, and people not looking where they're going. And we asked these questions for 6 different activity groups, and we asked 2 questions for each one of these 3. First, how often have you observed these things going on at the site? And second, to what extent do you think they're a problem at the site? You might have observed them lots of times, but really don't think it's a big problem. And what we did is we combined these for each of the 6 different activity groups and did k-means cluster analysis on the composite index to segment people into different types of conflict. And 3 major types of conflict, or no conflict, there's no conflict going on. Interpersonal conflict, which is really you're observing the event, you're seeing it going on, it might actually be happening to you, and you think it's a problem at the site. In other words, it's a negative impact. Social values, you might never actually observe it, but philosophically you disagree with that activity going on at the site. A really good example of that is people riding horses in high alpine wilderness parks. People might never see people riding horses, but philosophically disagree with the appropriateness of having those animals in there, so they say they experience a social values conflict. See the same thing between wildlife viewers and hunters. And what we did is, I'm doing a little bit of hand waving here. It results in a 3 by 6 by 6 by 6 matrix, and I am not going to show this because it's hundreds of thousands of numbers.